Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St. Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some people.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 8th of August 2020, we look at thoughtful, 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 with the view being that it will help the nation's development if many more Vincentians are thoughtful of the circumstances of our fellow men and women, particularly regarding the undemocratic, callous, and unjust things which are meted out to some of the people of the country. The Oxford Dictionary defines thoughtful as showing consideration for the needs of other people. And the Collins Dictionary states that if you describe someone as thoughtful, you approve of them because they remember what other people want, need, or feel and try not to upset them. Those definitions tell us that to be thoughtful is to be considerate about other people's needs. Those definitions tell us that to be thoughtful is to remember what other people want or need. The definitions tell us that to be thoughtful is to remember and think about what other people feel. To be thoughtful is to try not to upset other people. It is with those definitions in mind, and with the sudden passing earlier this week, on Tuesday the 4th of August 2020, of Jerry S. George, which trigger us here on A View from the Outside to cover this topic today. Jerry usually dubbed his early in the morning program on a Tuesday, Thoughtful Tuesday. And during his program, on Tuesday the 4th of August 2020, Jerry exited the frame. His very last words, after he introduced the program and left his co-host, Beverly Sinclair, to carry on. Beverly Sinclair was left with the impression that Jerry would have returned to continue the program. But he never did. He died suddenly. She, unknown to what happened to Jerry, recounted her experience to the viewers about the abandonment of a man with a disability and how troubled and thoughtful she was about the man's circumstances that she reached out to him and assisted him. As melancholy as the passing of Jerry is, it is rather poignant that he passed away. He exited the frame during his program on Thoughtful Tuesday. Perhaps in his passing on Thoughtful Tuesday, whilst his co-host was recounting her own experience and thoughtfulness, Jerry was leaving one final message to all Vincentians, which is to be thoughtful of our fellow citizens and of all those around us. Jerry was a journalist who left no stone unturned to try to get to the truth. He was acutely aware of the atrocities which the regime in St. Vincent and the Grenadines metes out to the Vincentian people, and he spoke often on the multiplicity of issues which Vincentians have to endure on a daily basis. Jerry abhorred injustice, and he was fearless in speaking up and speaking out about it. Perhaps in his passing, in the circumstances which he died, Jerry was saying to us that as a people, as a nation, we owe it to our fellow Vincentians to be more thoughtful of others. Perhaps he was saying to us that we cannot continue to tolerate those atrocities that are meted out to our people. We cannot continue to ignore wrong. We cannot continue to ignore the injustice of citizens having their lands been taken away from them in circumstances where it is said that party politics seems to be the overriding motivation. We cannot continue to have a regime which ignores court orders to compensate citizens whom they, the regime, have wronged and leaves citizens uncompensated for years. We cannot continue to have a regime which threatens to take away, and in some cases actually takes away, the lands of citizens seemingly out of political spite. Vincentians, we have all heard the cries of Ras Shaka with his lands at Bucament, and Dr. Wayne Murray and his wife and their family with their lands in the Murray's Village, Rockies area. And of course, for years now, we have all heard and know about the cries of Bigger Biggs and Marcus de Freitas. And there are others, many others, some who are suffering in silence. We cannot continue to witness victimization, wanton political victimization, and just carry on as normal. We cannot continue with a regime which continues to undermine and erode the rule of law in the country. We cannot continue to watch the oppression and the crushing of our fellow human beings and remain silent. We cannot continue to ignore and close our eyes to corruption. We cannot continue to ignore the corrupt and the corrupt practices and carry on as if that is normal. We cannot continue to see the law being flouted and give no thought to those who are crushed under the weight of the establishment. In that regard, remember the motion of no confidence, which was denied to the opposition in the parliament of the country. Remember also how parliamentarians were tossed out of the parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Vincentians, we cannot continue to ignore the assault on decency in the country. We must no longer tolerate a situation where our fellow citizens, particularly the young people, are forced to surrender their dignity for the promise of scholarships and jobs. We must not allow a situation where those in the upper echelons of the regime, or anyone else for that matter, use their power and might to engage in lewd and lascivious conduct, including engaging in indecency of the grossest kind over the telephone. In that regard, one cannot forget the young woman in the Ramin Gate affair who was forced to flee the country for her own safety, while the senior politician who subjected her to such indecency is carrying on his life in opulence, comfort, and convenience. Vincentians, we cannot continue to watch our women and girls being weighed down by the weight of a regime and pretend that we do not care. We have to be more thoughtful. We must always remember what was done to Yogi Farrell, the aspiring model, who felt the brunt of the establishment, the weight of the regime, and the weight of its agents and enablers. We must remember how, as a result of what they have done to her, how they all treated her, and how she continues to languish in despair. We must also always remember the policewoman, Michelle Andrews. She continues to languish on the beat at the same rank of police constable, more than a decade after she alleged that she was raped and sexually assaulted by the leader of the regime while she was on duty guarding him and his family. We must take steps to protect our women, girls, and boys from domestic abuse, rape, and sexual assaults. The accounts are just too harrowing. Vincentians, we cannot continue to ignore a regime which continually ignores the Constitution, the highest law of the land, and not provide accountability, financial accountability, as mandated by the very Constitution of our country. We cannot continue to ignore the attempts to suppress freedom of speech with continual lawsuits and the continual threats of lawsuits, and with attempts to instigate the initiation of criminal action against law-abiding citizens. We must be more thoughtful, and we must put a stop to these things. Vincentians, we must be thoughtful of the plight of others, and we must not allow ourselves to be seized by fear and not speak up and speak out about the ills and wrongs in our society. When we see members of our families, our neighbors, those in our villages and towns are denied employment, even employment which is considered to be menial on the basis of their political affiliation, we know that we must be thoughtful of them, and we must speak up and speak out against such vindictive behavior of the regime. We must be thoughtful of those who live in desperation and despair every day, wondering where the next meal for them and their children is coming from, and wondering how they are going to pay their utilities bills and meet their basic needs. And we must take steps to change the prevailing circumstances which have them merely existing rather than living. The regime has shown that they are about injustice rather than justice. They have shown that they are about setting up a dynasty rather than looking out for the interest and welfare of all Vincentians. They have shown that they are for nepotism, which is jobs for their family and friends. And because of that, they need to be told, enough is enough. They need to be told, enough, no more. Our people cannot continue to fall prey to lumber, cement, and galvanize every election cycle in the regime's attempts to bribe voters to get their votes. That in itself is an injustice. Our people must be thoughtful and think about the consequences of such practice by the regime. Experience has shown that it would be another 5 years of famine if they are allowed to continue. Vincentians, we must be thoughtful of those who live with the uncertainty of whether they can afford the huge cost of medication, because even the general hospital constantly lacks basic medication and supplies. We must be thoughtful of all those things which have St. Vincent and the Grenadines languishing at the bottom of the economic ladder when compared to its counterparts in the OECS and CARICOM. Vincentians, we, on A View from the Outside, say that if we want to honor Jerry S. George and acknowledge and carry on or carry out his message to be thoughtful of others, we must all be vocal and speak up and speak out. Let us not only speak glowingly about Jerry S. George at the time of his death, but let us take action and speak up and speak out about all of those things that we have mentioned and more. Let us be thoughtful of the plight of others, and let us do what is necessary and right to ensure that justice ends. Let us promote the call for justice for all. Remember, register to vote and go out and vote in order to achieve the changes necessary to bring about justice for all. As we do that, let us all be mindful of the words of the late American cultural anthropologist and author Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, concerned citizens can change the world." Vincentians, we all certainly can change things. We can change the world of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as they currently exist in our quest for justice for all. Until next week, Randy and all of the listeners, this is Brereton Horne with A View from the Outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page at A View from the Outside, and also visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Everyone, do have a pleasant Saturday, have a wonderful Sunday, and have a productive week ahead as we continue to spread the message of Jerry S. George to be thoughtful of our fellow men and women. All the best to you, Randy, and the listeners.